The intern nurse and her fetus reveal a crime dormant for 10 years at Mercy General. No one ever imagined that a 23-year-old nursing intern would become the epicenter of the biggest scandal to ever hit Mercy General Hospital, a place typically defined by the steady beep of heart monitors, the hurried footsteps of emergency responders, and the stoic nods of the medical elite. But no. The story of that girl, Hannah, sent shockwaves through the entire hospital, causing hundreds of sleepless nights and dragging a decade-old secret into the light, a secret revealed by the very fetus growing inside her. Hannah arrived in Chicago with nothing to her name. Her only luggage, a freshly printed nursing certificate, and a burning desire to change her life. She wasn't flashy like the social media influencers. Nor was she the kind of sharp, head-turning beauty. But there was something about Hannah's eyes, a clear, resilient gaze that held a special kind of pull. And soon enough, those very eyes met the gaze of Dr. Marcus Thorne, the chief of surgery. Dr. Thorne, a 55-year-old man, had spent more than half his life under the glare of surgical lights, had lost his wife in a mysterious accident right here at this hospital. And ever since, had operated like a machine, devoid of emotion. Their first meeting was unremarkable, just a clumsy moment when Hannah dropped a tray of surgical instruments, causing Dr. Thorne to hold his gaze on her for a few extra seconds. Who could have known that those few fateful seconds would unleash a breathtaking series of bizarre and suffocating events? The late-night shifts with just the two of them. The wordless glances that seemed harmless on the surface but churned up a violent storm within. And then, the inevitable happened. After one long, drizzly night, Hannah realized she had crossed the fragile line between reason and emotion. That was also when she began to pay the price, not just with her reputation and her future career, but with the very safety of herself and the tiny life growing inside her. But who would have guessed that the fetus, seemingly the consequence of a single mistake, was actually the key that would blow open the doors to a secret buried for 10 long years. A secret where blood, tears, and sin had been whitewashed by the hospital's sterile paint and the power of those who sat at the pinnacle of prestige. Would the young intern dare to pursue the truth to its bitter end? Did the man old enough to be her father truly love her? Or was he hiding something monstrous? And the unborn child, was it a source of salvation? Or the spark that would burn everything to the ground? Hannah chose to stay. And you, the one listening to this story, you should brace yourself, because from this moment on, all gentleness ends. The story begins. It was a spring morning in Chicago. The sky was neither sunny nor rainy, but a creeping chill seeped into the skin, enough to make one shudder while walking through the towering iron gates of Mercy General Hospital. Hannah clutched the worn strap of her canvas bag, her heart pounding as she stared at the automatic revolving doors. This wasn't just her first day as an intern. This place would decide the entire course of her life. The girl from a small town in Ohio, fresh out of community college with her nursing degree, was setting foot in a top-tier city hospital for the very first time. Her clothes were neat, her hair tied back in a high ponytail, her eyes clear but tinged with anxiety. Hannah walked slowly, watching the hurried pace of the doctors in their white coats rushing past. Everyone was busy. No one noticed her, a single grain of sand entering the colossal machine of modern medicine. At the reception desk, she was told to head up to the surgical department to meet her supervisor, Dr. Marcus Thorne. Upon hearing the name, the receptionist gave her a strange glance and a quiet, peculiar HMH. But Hannah paid it no mind. She clutched her bag and stepped into the elevator, thinking only one thing: I have to do a good job. I can't let anyone look down on me. 5th floor. Surgery. The moment the elevator doors opened, she heard a loud shout echoing from an operating room. Do not let the scalpel touch the nerve. How many times have I told you? A nurse standing outside shook her head. Dr. Thorne is on a rampage again. Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs. She hadn't realized her supervisor was known for having a temper like thunder. But before she could retreat, the door swung open and the man himself walked out. His white coat was slung casually over his shoulder, his gloves still stained with streaks of blood. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, his nose sharp, his eyes deep-set and lined with wrinkles. But the way he looked at his surroundings, his every step, every furrow of his brow, it all radiated a calm authority and something else. Something hard to name. Hannah timidly greeted him. Hello, doctor. I'm the new intern. He merely glanced at her without a word and started to walk away. But then, as if remembering something, he turned back. Hannah. Right. Follow me. Just 3 words. But his voice was deep, clear, and abrupt, not the coldness of someone who looked down on others, but the curtness of a man who had no time for pleasantries. That entire morning, Hannah was assigned to record patient files and assist in preparing tools for an appendectomy. Sweat beaded on her forehead from the nerves, her every movement trembling. She had no idea what Dr. Rinterment Thorne thought of her because he didn't say a single word the whole time. His face was like a stone tablet, not angry, not happy, just blank. At noon, when the surgery was complete, she was about to retreat to the on-call room when he suddenly spoke. Wipe down the operating table. Use the disinfectant solution a second time. Don't leave any streaks. Hannah flinched. His voice wasn't harsh, but it was so definitive that it made her feel like she'd just made a huge mistake. She hurried to comply. As she bent over to wipe the table meticulously, she didn't notice his gaze lingering on her. Not with any kind of desire, but with a different emotion, as if something about her was unsettling. Or perhaps familiar. That evening, Hannah returned to her small apartment, her legs aching. Her roommate, Chloe, offered some sympathy. Working with Dr. Thorne is exhausting. The man's a famous block of ice. But Hannah just managed a weak smile. It's okay. I think he's strict but fair. She had no idea that this fairness, and the bottomless gaze of the 55-year-old man, would be the very things to drag her into a vortex with no escape. A new life was beginning, not with applause, but with whispers, secrets, and an unplanned pregnancy. Only in her second week as an intern, Hannah was assigned to assist in a special surgery, the removal of a liver tumor from an elderly patient. This case was being personally overseen by Dr. Marcus Thorne. Normally, an intern wouldn't be allowed in a major operating room. But that day, the scrub nurse had a sudden accident. Hannah was unexpectedly thrust into the role, trembling but unable to refuse. She stood huddled in a corner of the OR, clutching a box of spare gloves. The harsh surgical lights illuminated every line on Dr. Thorne's face. He looked at no one but the patient. It was as if he controlled everything in the room with a cold, tight energy, stretched taut like a violin string. The patient's heartbeat echoed steadily from the monitor. No one dared to breathe too loudly. One small mistake was enough to get the entire team written up, or worse, to cost a life. Hannah kept her head down, trying to recall her clinical training, every sterilization protocol, every step for passing instruments. But when the lead nurse turned to her and snapped, "Number 3, clamp. Now." Her hand froze. Which one is the number 3 clamp? For a moment, her memory was completely wiped clean. "Hurry up." The nurse barked again. In a panic, Hannah mistakenly handed over a number 5 clamp. Dr. Thorne just glanced over. He didn't get angry, didn't reprimand her, but his eyes were as sharp as a scalpel, and the look he gave her left her frozen in place. He didn't take the clamp from her hand. Instead, he leaned over and picked the correct one from the tray himself. No one said another word, but she knew she had just made a terrible impression. The surgery lasted nearly 2 hours. By the time the final stitch was closed, Hannah's palms were soaked with sweat. She was sure she'd be kicked out of the department. But as everyone was preparing to leave, Dr. Thorne unexpectedly turned back and said very quietly, "Next time, study the names of the instruments before you enter the room. But I will say, you didn't break pace." The words sent a jolt down Hannah's spine. She didn't understand why he'd said it, but his voice held no scolding or disappointment, just a quiet acknowledgement that, to her in that moment, was worth more than any word of encouragement. That afternoon, as she was cleaning the operating room alone, a hand landed on her shoulder. It was Dr. Thorne. "Follow me." He led her to the supply closet, a small, quiet room where you could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. He handed her a binder and pointed to each type of scalpel, scissor, and clamp. His voice was unchanged, still flat and curt, but this time, it was clearer, more patient. She listened intently, not daring to ask questions, only nodding slightly. As she bent down to put a clamp away, her fingers accidentally brushed against his hand. They both flinched. He pulled his hand back first, his eyes softening for a fraction of a second. Then he said, almost mockingly to himself, "Your hands are so cold. Just like someone I used to know." Hannah didn't ask who that person was, but his words left a confusing emptiness inside her. There was something about him that wasn't just the strictness of a department chief, but a darkness, a shadow, a memory that hadn't been put to rest. 3 days later, Hannah's night shift ended at 10 p.m. She left the pharmacy, her back aching. The surgical ward was almost completely dark, with only a few faint lights casting shadows down the hallway toward the operating rooms. The hospital was dead silent at this hour, the only sounds her own footsteps echoing in the empty hall and the low hum of the ventilation system. She was fumbling in her pocket for her wallet to buy a coffee from the vending machine, when a familiar male voice came from behind her. "Still here this late?" Hannah turned, surprised to see Dr. Self. Thorne standing there, still in his white coat, a briefcase in his hand. He wasn't wearing a mask. And his face, illuminated by the yellow fluorescent lights, looked older than usual, but his eyes were strangely bright. She stammered, "Yes, sir. My shift just ended. I was about to grab a coffee and head home." He looked at her for a few seconds and then said, unexpectedly, "I know a good place. Not far from here. Would you like to get some dinner?" Hannah froze. It was such a sudden invitation from a man she had always seen as dry, cold, and unapproachable. A man 32 years her senior, and her direct superior. Every rational thought in her head screamed, "Don't go." But for some reason, the words that came out of her mouth were a soft, "Yes. If you don't mind. I'd like that." The good place he mentioned was a small Vietnamese restaurant, tucked away in a deep alley in a quiet, old neighborhood, with worn wooden tables and black and white photos covering the walls. She couldn't understand why a man as private and principled as him would choose a place so steeped in nostalgia. He ordered 2 bowls of rare beef pho and a hot ginger tea. While they waited, the silence between them was awkward. But then he broke it, his voice surprisingly gentle. "This is where I used to bring my wife to eat. Back when she was alive." The sentence was like a soft blade grazing Hannah's mind. She nodded slightly, not daring to ask more. But perhaps it was her silence that made him open up. "She died at the hospital. 10 years ago. Fell from the 5th floor. From the balcony in the inpatient wing. Everyone said it was an accident. I never believed it." Hannah was stunned. She had never heard anyone in the department mention the death of Dr. Thorne's wife. All she knew was that he lived alone, had no children, and always avoided personal topics. Do you suspect someone?" He didn't answer right away. Just took a slow sip of his ginger tea, his gaze distant. "I had my suspicions, but no proof. I was in surgery at the time, and the security camera in that area was coincidentally malfunctioning. The whole thing was swept under the rug as if it never happened." The air in the restaurant felt heavy. A chill ran down Hannah's spine. The story he was telling wasn't just a memory. It felt like a warning of something to come. The meal ended as the clock neared 11. On the way back, he asked her, "Where do you live?" "I have a room on a street at the edge of Lincoln Park. Next time you work a late shift, let me know. That area isn't very safe for a girl walking alone." It was a simple statement of concern, but it stirred something in Hannah. Was she just that vulnerable? Or was it the deep, sincere tone in his voice? A 55-year-old man should have been nothing more than a teacher, a boss. So why was this strange feeling beginning to ripple through her heart? That night, back in her room, Hannah opened a small box. Inside, besides a silver fountain pen with the faint initials M.T. engraved on it, there was a small note folded into a square. She carefully unfolded it. The handwritten words, slightly faded with time, read, "If I was wrong, will that person ever forgive me?" Hannah's heart felt like it was being squeezed. She didn't know who wrote it, Dr. Thorne or his wife before she died, or who that person in the note referred to. The questions gnawed at her until dawn. She was beginning to realize that what existed between her and Dr. Thorn wasn't just empathy, but an invisible thread that was tightening with each passing day, pulling her into dark, colored memories she had never dared to touch. Everything changed one night on shift. Hannah was working late. Mercy General seemed to hold its breath behind the thick glass doors. The hallway lights were dim, and the distant echo of heart monitors created a rhythm that was steady but chilling. She made herself a quick cup of ginger tea, but just as she sat down, the on-call room door burst open. It was Dr. Thorn. He wasn't wearing his white coat, just a simple white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing tanned skin and strong wrists. He was holding a paper bag. "I saw you hadn't eaten. You've gotten thinner lately." He placed the bag on the table. Inside was a container of hot food and a bottle of corn milk. A simple meal, but it made Hannah's throat tighten. "Thank you, doctor. But I'm fine. I don't want you collapsing from exhaustion." The statement was unadorned, but it left her speechless. They sat in silence across from each other, the only sound the ticking of the clock. "Doctor, can I ask you something honestly?" "Go ahead." "If your wife hadn't died that day, would you be different?" He looked at her, longer than usual, his experienced eyes seeming to peer into her very soul. "I used to be a different person. Lively, warm, and blind. Losing her turned me into someone I don't even recognize." His voice dropped, as if an old wound was being rubbed with salt. "And what about now?" He was quiet for a moment, then replied, "Now, I'm starting to feel scared again. Scared of trusting someone. Scared of losing them." It started raining late that night. Hannah was about to get her raincoat to head home when she discovered her scooter had a flat tire. Just then, Dr. Thorn walked by. "Let me give you a ride." In his old, silver-gray sedan. They sat in silence, the faint smell of antiseptic hanging in the air. He stopped at the end of her street. Hannah hesitated. "Thank you, doctor. I can get home from here." Without turning to look at her, he just said, "You don't have to keep calling me doctor. Outside of the hospital, I'm just a tired old man." His words were like a door swinging open, and she didn't know why. But she reached out and gently touched the back of his hand. It was a light touch, but it made the world seem to stand still. He looked at her, and for the first time, his gaze wasn't distant. It was an admission, an acknowledgement that he, too, needed someone to lean on. That night, as Hannah stepped into her apartment, the wind was still cold, but her heart was burning. Her heart had been stirred, not by a young man, not by some dreamy college romance, but by a man who had lived, who had lost, and who needed to feel something real again. The next morning, Hannah was violently ill while changing a patient's bandages. Her colleagues buzzed around her, one of them joking, "Don't tell me you're pregnant." The thoughtless joke hit Hannah like a slap in the face. She forced a smile, claiming it must have been something she ate in the cafeteria. But a cold dread washed over her. Her last period was almost 2 weeks late. That night, huddled under her blankets, Hannah trembled as she opened a pregnancy test in the bathroom of her apartment. 3 minutes felt like a lifetime. When 2 distinct red lines appeared, her hand went limp, and the test strip clattered onto the cold tile floor. Pregnant, the 23-year-old nurse, not even done with her internship, was pregnant with the child of Dr. Thorn, a man old enough to be her father. 3 days later, Hannah arranged to meet him at the old Vietnamese restaurant. Her hands were ice cold as she tried to stay calm, but when she saw him walk in, with that same quiet demeanor, she nearly burst into tears. "I have something to tell you." He pulled up a chair and nodded. "I'm listening." I'm pregnant." Not a sound. Not a sharp intake of breath, just a silence that stretched for nearly a full minute. Then, he gently set his chopsticks down. "How far along?" "A little over 2 weeks." He fell silent again. Hannah clasped her hands together, her voice pleading. "I'm not asking for anything. And I don't want to get you into trouble. I just want to keep the baby. It's my baby. I can take care of it myself." But before she could finish, he cut her off. "No." "Well, keep it." Hannah looked up, stunned. "I have nothing left to lose," he continued, his voice firm, "but I have never wanted to abandon a life. Especially not one that belongs to you and me." Hannah broke down, sobbing like a heartbroken child. But life is never that simple. The news leaked with terrifying speed. Within a week, the entire hospital was buzzing. And the stares that followed Hannah were like daggers. That afternoon, Hannah was summoned to the hospital director's office. Director Evans was a man in his 60s with eyes as sharp as a scalpel and a smile that never reached them. He tapped his fingers on the desk. "You're young. You have a long future ahead of you. Why would you choose such a dangerous shortcut?" "Sir, I'm not taking any shortcuts. Do you think this only affects you? The hospital cannot let its reputation be tarnished." He leaned back in his chair, his tone changing. "We can arrange for you to take a leave of absence from your internship. Quietly. No need to make a big deal out of it." Hannah stood up, her voice trembling but resolute. "I'm sorry, sir. I will not be leaving my internship, and I will not be getting rid of my child. If the hospital wants to fire me, then you can issue a formal written decision." She left the office with her head held high, her stomach churning. But her heart was no longer afraid. She had a life inside of her, and a man who had chosen to stay. Hannah had never felt her own footsteps echo so heavily through the hospital halls. Just a week ago, she was the intern a few people admired for her hard work. Now, every glance that passed over her was filled with suspicion, whispers, or even contempt. Dr. Thorne, however, was different. He was the same as always, cold, precise, silent as a stone statue. But whenever he saw Hannah, his gaze would linger a moment longer, as if he were trying to hide something. She, too, chose silence, because she knew the storm had already broken, and the first headwinds were just beginning to blow. One afternoon, Hannah was sitting in the hospital cafeteria when Chloe walked in, not with her usual cheerful smile, but with a cold, hard stare, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Do you have any idea that you're ruining everything? Not just Dr. Thorne's reputation, but the chances of people like me, people who study hard, who fight for this every single day." Hannah was taken aback. "I didn't mean to. Didn't mean to. Or was it all calculated? Do you really think Dr. Thorne loves you? A man who lost his wife, who's old enough to be your father, who was living a quiet life until some small-town girl who hasn't even graduated latched onto him. Wake up." Chloe's voice was sharp, her eyes red-rimmed. But in her anger, there was something more than just jealousy. There was hatred. A deep, personal wound. Hannah said nothing, not wanting to argue, but her mind was in turmoil. She had no idea what it was about her that had made Chloe so venomous. 2 days later, Hannah was called to the director's office again. But this time, it wasn't just Director Evans. A representative from HR was there, along with an unfamiliar, middle-aged man with glasses and a face like cold cash. "We have received a complaint from hospital staff regarding an inappropriate relationship between a senior staff member and an intern. We will be opening an internal investigation," Director Evans said slowly, tapping his desk. "Hannah, you can voluntarily withdraw from the internship for the good of both parties. I haven't done anything wrong. If you want to fire me, just say so." No one expected the small young woman to stand so straight, to speak each word so clearly, without tears or pleading. As she walked out of the room, the strange man muttered, "The resemblance is unbelievable." But the comment was quickly swallowed by the silence. With no explanation, that afternoon, a strange text message arrived on Hannah's phone from an unsaved number. "If you don't want something to happen to your baby, stop being curious about the 5th floor. Don't let someone else's past drag you to the grave." Hannah trembled, her hand tightening around the phone. She knew she was being watched. But why? Had things escalated this far just because she was pregnant? Or had this pregnancy accidentally touched on something that someone wanted to keep buried? She remembered the story about Dr. Thorne's late wife. An accident. A fall from the 5th floor 10 years ago. No cameras, no witnesses, and a rushed coroner's report. One rare afternoon when she got to leave early, Hannah went to the old records room, a place no one ever visited. She used the excuse of reviewing old surgical files for a report. But in reality, only one thing was on her mind: the 5th floor. She wanted to find the file on the death of Dr. Thorne's wife, Vivian Thorne. The room held hundreds of dusty binders, lit by dim yellow lights. The air thick with the smell of damp paper. She moved between the rusty metal shelves, carefully flipping through each file cover. After nearly an hour, she found it, wedged crookedly inside a stack of unrelated documents. The file was nearly 50 pages thick. The first page contained the victim's personal information. Cause of death: traumatic brain injury after a fall from the 5th floor. The conclusion was stamped in red ink. Workplace accident. Everything seemed to be in order. But then she noticed a strange detail. At the end of the file, in a section for additional notes, was a line handwritten in blue ink. Recommend re-evaluation of injuries due to signs of a struggle, followed by a professional report that had been torn out. She was about to take a picture when she heard footsteps outside. Her heart pounded. She turned off the light and ducked into a dark corner. A shadow stood silently outside the door. Then she heard the doorknob turn slowly. The door creaked open. Hannah held her breath. A soft whisper echoed into the room. Curiosity can get you killed, sweetie. Then the door closed. That night, she took the file back to her apartment. As she turned to the last page, an old slip of paper fell out from inside. The yellowed paper held a single, desperate, scrawled line. He pushed me. You have to believe me. M. Just a single initial. Hannah froze. Was it possible his wife knew she was being murdered? And this note was a final cry for help. Hidden for 10 years. The first heavy rain of the season began to pour over the city without warning. In the middle of her night shift, for reasons she couldn't explain, Hannah found herself drawn to the 5th floor hallway, the very spot where Vivian had died. Suddenly, there were footsteps behind her. Hannah spun around. It was Dr. Thorne. He was soaked to the bone. His graying hair matted down, but his eyes were quiet, as if he knew she would be standing there. I used to stand here for 3 months straight after she died, he said, his voice low. I was in an emergency heart surgery that day. She came up here alone. The last person to see her alive was Director Evans. The statement made Hannah's blood run cold. Did he say anything? He said she was inspecting the inpatient rooms and slipped. That's all. Hannah clenched her fists. I found the file. It mentioned a recommendation for re-evaluation, but the report was torn out. Dr. Thorne was silent, his eyes fixed on her stomach. For the sake of the baby, I thought it was best to let it all go. But if you've seen it too, then perhaps we can't stay silent any longer. That night in her apartment, Hannah laid out the file and the note Vivian had left behind. He pushed me. You have to believe me. M. Who was he? And who was M? She opened her laptop and searched through an old photo album on the Internal Medical Forum. Suddenly, a picture appeared that made her freeze. It was a group photo of the surgical department from 2015. Standing next to Vivian was Director Evans. And on his wrist was the gold-plated watch with a green face he was always showing off. But what sent a chill down her spine was the blurry figure standing in the back left corner. It was unmistakably Chloe. Even though Chloe wasn't officially working at the hospital yet, she was clearly there. Why was Chloe at the scene that year? Hannah printed the photo, folded it, and tucked it into her journal. Her heart was racing. Now there wasn't just one person in the shadows, but two. And one of them might be very close to her, so close that a single misstep could cost her the child in her womb. 3 days later, a strange envelope was stuffed into her personal locker. There was no return address. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper with large, clear, printed letters. The child in your womb should not exist. Stop, or someone will run out of time to be sorry. She stood frozen, her trembling hand clutching the note. A sudden chill piercing her heart. The next day, an anonymous email was sent to the entire hospital's internal mailing list. The content was a single sentence. The chief of surgery is having an illicit affair with an intern, whose resulting pregnancy is damaging the hospital's reputation and requires immediate suspension. Instantly, the news spread like wildfire. People no longer looked at Hannah with scrutiny, but with pity, as if waiting for her to crumble. She was urgently summoned to the HR department. The legal representative pressed her. Can you confirm that you are pregnant with Dr. Marcus Thorne's child? I am not obligated to answer that question. If you refuse to cooperate, we will be forced to consider suspending your internship. She stood up, took out her phone, opened her photo gallery, and showed them the old picture from 2015. The one with a blurry Chloe standing behind Vivian. So, is this just a rumor? Or is it evidence? The room fell silent. I don't know who is trying to destroy me. But if you all continue to turn a blind eye to what's really going on, I am prepared to take all of my documents and a formal complaint to the press and the authorities. Her words stunned the entire room. A small, pregnant intern, daring to stand before an internal committee without backing down. That night, before she went to sleep, she received one more anonymous text. You've got guts. But don't forget, dead people can't talk. Here is the conclusion to your story. She looked at her phone, then placed a hand on her stomach. Mom's not scared. I'm going to protect you. And I'm going to find out who spilled blood on the 5th floor all those years ago. That afternoon, the sky was clear, but the air in Mercy General Hospital was thick with an indescribable heaviness. Hannah knew she had to confront Chloe face to face. Late that night, Hannah waited for Chloe at a small tea shop near their apartment building. She ordered 2 lemon iced teas and chose a table hidden from the lights. Chloe arrived 20 minutes late. Her face, a cold mask, devoid of its usual makeup. What's so important? Hannah didn't beat around the bush. She pulled the photograph from her bag and pushed it across the table. This is a picture of the surgical department from 2015. You're in the back left corner. You weren't an official employee then. Why were you there? Chloe flinched. Just for a second. But it was enough for Hannah to know her gut feeling was right. I was there because I was an intern. A short-term internship. It wasn't all logged. And did you see anything on the 5th floor the day Vivian Thorne died? Silence. Hannah clenched her fists, her voice hardening. I'm pregnant. I'm being threatened. And I was almost suspended. You're the only person who knew I was looking for the files. You sent the threatening letters. Didn't you? Do you think I did all of that just because I was jealous? Chloe let out a bitter laugh. But her eyes were already welling up with tears. It wasn't jealousy. Hannah pressed. It was because you know too much about what happened that year. And you're too scared to say anything. At that, Chloe finally broke. She buried her head in her hands, her body shaking, her voice choked. I was there. I saw Director Evans push her. I was delivering some papers to the department. I heard them arguing. Vivian said she was going to expose his embezzlement of hospital medication. And then he pushed her off the 5th floor balcony. Hannah was frozen, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. Then why didn't you say anything? I was scared. I was just an intern. He was the director. Who would have believed me? I've kept silent for 10 years. It's eaten away at me. Haunted me. I can't forgive myself. And you tried to push me out of the hospital because I was digging up the past. Chloe sobbed, nodding. I thought if you left, everything would be buried again. I was afraid he'd find out I was a witness. I thought if you just disappeared, I would be safe. A long silence stretched between them. Hannah didn't cry. She just took a deep breath and looked straight at the woman who was once her best friend. You know what the scariest thing is, Chloe? It's not being killed. It's living your whole life in a cage that you locked yourself into. I want to make it right. Then come forward as a witness. So I don't have to fight this alone anymore. That night, Hannah went back to her room and held her belly. The baby inside her gave a soft kick, as if signaling that the truth was finally coming to light. You would think that after Chloe's confession, Hannah would finally be able to breathe a sigh of relief. But no. The closer she got to the truth, the more she felt like she was standing in the middle of a maze with countless dead ends, each new door opening into a newer, deeper, colder darkness. She started to feel like she was being watched. Every time she walked down the 3rd floor inpatient hallway, she felt a pair of eyes on her from behind a curtained hospital room window. At first, she thought it was her imagination. But for several days in a row, she kept catching a glimpse of a small boy, around 7 or 8 years old, with a pale face, unusually dark eyes, and a worn-out turtleneck sweater. He usually sat on the windowsill in Wing G, an area for short-stay patients. One afternoon, Hannah worked up the courage to approach him. She asked gently, "Hi there. What room are you in?" The boy didn't answer, just stared at her for a long time before asking, "Are you Dr. Thorne's girlfriend?" The question made Hannah freeze. She glanced around the empty hallway. "How do you know Dr. Thorne?" "Because he brings me yogurt every day." "What's your name?" "Leo." "Where are your parents?" The boy didn't reply, just turned his face to the window, his hands gripping the metal bars. The unfinished answer was a loose thread that Hannah knew she had to pull. The next day, she looked up the inpatient records for Wing G. There was no patient named Leo matching his age and description. When she asked the nurses on duty, they said no child like that had been admitted recently. She shuddered. It was impossible. She had touched the boy's hand. He couldn't have been a hallucination. That afternoon, she went back up to the 3rd floor. The boy was there again, this time scribbling on a piece of paper. As she got closer, he held up the drawing. It was a picture of a person standing on a high balcony, with the shadow of another person behind them, pushing hard. Hannah was stunned. She knelt, her voice soft. "Who taught you to draw this?" "I saw it in my dream. My mommy fell from there." A man pushed her. Her heart clenched. "What was your mommy's name?" The boy looked directly into her eyes and said slowly, clearly, "Vivian." Hannah's entire body went rigid. It couldn't be. This boy was Vivian's son. But Dr. Thorne had told her he and his wife didn't have any children. Was there another secret? That evening, Hannah went to Dr. Thorne's house. He opened the door, unsurprised, and simply looked at her before quietly stepping aside. "I met a little boy named Leo. He says he's Vivian's son." Dr. Thorne stood frozen. "Do you know him?" He sank into a chair, rubbing his forehead. After a long, heavy silence, he finally exhaled. "Yes. Leo is a child my wife adopted without ever telling me. I only found out when I found a letter shed hidden in the study. After she was gone." "Why would she hide it?" "Because she was pregnant once. But she miscarried. After that, I grew cold. I didn't want to try for children again. I was wrong. So she quietly adopted a child, the son of a patient who'd been abandoned. She was waiting for the right time to tell me. But she never got the chance." His voice cracked. "After that, Leo was taken in by an acquaintance in the medical field. I lost track of him. But it turns out he's been here all along." They sat in silence for a long time. Hannah looked out the window, a strange feeling welling up inside her. Leo, the quiet boy with the endlessly sad eyes, wasn't just an unconscious witness to his adopted mother's wrongful death. He might be the final piece of a puzzle that was slowly revealing the truth. 2 days after their conversation, Hannah decided to go back to the 3rd floor inpatient wing. But the boy was nowhere to be found. She asked the nurse on duty and got the same familiar answer. Just as she was about to leave, she noticed something under a bench in the waiting area. A set of papers, neatly clipped together inside a clear plastic sleeve. On them were scribbled drawings in colored pencil. The first drawing showed a woman with long hair standing near a railing. Behind her was a man in a white coat, his arm raised as if pushing forcefully. The second showed the woman falling, the hem of her dress flying up. The third showed a pair of horn-rimmed glasses falling out of the man's coat pocket, tumbling through the air. Hannah froze. Those glasses were the exact style Director Evans wore. She clutched the drawings, her heart hammering. These weren't just a child's drawings. They were a story, a silent accusation. That evening, Hannah brought the drawings to Dr. Thorne's house. When he opened the door, his eyes were a mixture of shock and terror. Who drew these?" "Leo." He collapsed onto a chair, his hand trembling as he touched the paper. "This is the scene from the day Vivian died. The glasses in the drawing. I'm sure they belong to Director Evans." He nodded slowly, the blood draining from his face. "If Leo saw..." Hannah took his hand, her voice firm. "We have to take these drawings to the police." "But Dr. Thorne shook his head. "It's not enough. Drawings aren't enough in the eyes of the law. We need to verify Leo's identity. Find whoever has been taking care of him." She nodded slightly, knowing he was right. But she also knew they had just struck Director Evans' Achilles' heel. And he wouldn't just stand by. The next morning, when Hannah arrived at the hospital, she saw something strange. The nameplate on the director's office had been removed, replaced with a sign that read, "On leave." Before she could even process it, she received a text from an unknown number. "You've gone too far now. Don't force me to make you the next one to fall from the 5th floor." For the first time, Hannah felt her legs go weak, not from fear, but from the understanding that this was no longer about a pregnancy or a rumor. This was about life and death. In the 2 days after Director Evans's sudden leave of absence, Mercy General Hospital fell into a state that was half silent, half suffocating. Meetings were postponed and rumors ran rampant through the halls. But no one dared to speak openly. Everyone knew something was simmering, waiting to explode. Hannah quietly continued her work, every footstep laced with anxiety. She could clearly feel someone secretly watching her every move. But this time, she was no longer alone. That afternoon, Dr. Thorne handed her a file. His eyes filled with determination. "I found the first draft of the original coroner's report, the unedited version. Vivian had severe bruising on both wrists. Signs of a struggle as she fell. But in the final report, this detail was completely erased." Hannah opened the file. The text. The stamps. The signatures, it was all authentic. In that case, she mused, this evidence, combined with Chloe's confession and Leo's drawings, might be enough to get the police to reopen the case. Dr. Thorne nodded. "I've already contacted a lawyer. But we still need a witness who can come forward. And that's Leo." That night, Hannah went to the inpatient wing but couldn't find the boy. She checked every room, even asked security to pull the camera footage. But strangely, there was no trace of Leo on any of the surveillance tapes. Panic began to set in. Was it possible he never existed? Just then, an elderly janitor leaned in and whispered to her, "Are you looking for the little boy who's always drawing? I've seen him a few times playing behind the old medicinal herb garden." Without hesitation, Hannah ran there. It was an old, rarely used auxiliary building. In a moss-covered corner, she saw Leo, sitting and drawing again. He looked up, his eyes a little frightened. But when he saw Hannah, he gave a small smile. "I was scared they'd take me away. No one's going to do anything to you while I'm here." She knelt and hugged the boy tightly. In that moment, all her doubts vanished. Leo was real. And he was the key. 2 days later, Hannah, Dr. Thorne, a trembling Chloe, and their lawyer officially submitted a petition to the investigative authorities, requesting to reopen the case of Vivian Thorne's death with new evidence. The authorities accepted the file and immediately launched an internal investigation at the hospital. The news sent shockwaves through the staff. Director Evans had vanished. When the police went to his private residence, they found he had left the day he went on leave. An internal warrant was issued. The police investigation was conducted quietly but rigorously. A special task force questioned many doctors and nurses who had worked in the surgical department back in 2015. And then, a small but shocking detail was discovered. In the on-call logbook from the day Vivian died, a name had been covered with correction fluid. When placed under a UV light, the name became clear. Evans. Why was a director on call for no specific reason? And why was his name erased? The police expanded their investigation. A check of Director Evans's bank accounts revealed a large unusual transfer made to an individual named Howard Miller, the technician in charge of the hospital's camera system in 2015. When brought in for questioning, Miller confessed that on that day, Director Evans had requested sudden maintenance on the 5th floor camera system and had personally ordered him to shut down the entire area for 4 hours. This testimony became a crucial piece of the puzzle, confirming that the 5th floor cameras had been disabled deliberately. At the same time, Hannah and Dr. Thorne sought out a woman named Linda, a retired nurse who had been close with Vivian. Hearing her old friend's name, Linda became emotional. "Vivian confided in me," she said. She had discovered that Evans was embezzling medication and funneling it to private clinics under his relatives' names. She had gathered some documents and was planning to present them to the hospital board. "Do you still have those documents?" "Not the originals. But I have a photocopy. Vivian gave it to me just in case something happened." The file contained purchase orders for medication and inventory records showing massive discrepancies, all authorized with Director Evans' own signature. The evidence was no longer just a story. It was now black and white. On the 25th of that month, the district attorney's office officially approved the indictment of Lawrence Evans for murder and abuse of power for the purpose of embezzlement. A nationwide arrest warrant was issued. The entire hospital was in turmoil. Hannah received the news while she was at a prenatal checkup, watching her baby's steady heartbeat on the ultrasound monitor. A part of the truth had been uncovered, but she knew the man at the top was still at large. One evening, as Hannah was organizing files in the on-call room, an envelope was slipped under the door. This time, it wasn't a threat. Inside was a small, unlabeled black USB drive. She plugged it into a spare, offline computer. A single folder appeared on the screen. Cam. Backup. 2015. Her eyes widened. She clicked it open. It was a video. Just over 2 minutes long. Recorded from a hidden security camera. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to recognize Vivian Thorne and Director Evans. It captured part of their argument, with Vivian holding a file up to his face. He appeared calm at first, then suddenly lunged forward, shoving her hard. She stumbled backward with nothing to grab onto, and fell. Hannah burst into tears. For the first time in all those years, the death of an innocent woman was no longer a question. The next morning, Hannah, Dr. Thorne, and their lawyer submitted the USB drive to the authorities. When the grainy but definitive footage of Director Evans' actions was played for the investigators, no one in the room had any doubt. A senior prosecutor shook his head slowly. Visual evidence. This is premeditated murder. With a cover-up and abuse of power. There's no way out for him now. With irrefutable proof. An international arrest warrant was issued that very night. Back at the hospital, a new interim leadership team was appointed, and a comprehensive overhaul began. Those who had stayed silent to keep the peace were either reprimanded or dismissed. With the fall of Director Evans, the network that had protected him was quickly dismantled. After nearly 3 months on the run, thanks to the cooperation of international police, Lawrence Evans was arrested in a dilapidated boarding house on the border, preparing to flee the country. The day he was extradited, images of the once powerful man, his hair now white, his eyes vacant and defeated, were splashed across every front page. In March, the Chicago air was still chilly, but it couldn't quell the breathless anticipation surrounding a trial 10 years in the making. The city superior court officially opened the murder and embezzlement trial of the defendant, Lawrence Evans. Hannah was summoned as a person of interest and a special witness. Dr. Thorne sat beside her, his hand clasped tightly as if to give her strength. In the defendant's box, Evans appeared, noticeably thinner, with none of his former arrogance. When called to testify, Evans was initially stubborn, his voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to kill her. It was an accident." From the back of the courtroom, Chloe sat silently, her eyes red. She, too, was a witness, and she had done her part, no longer running from the truth she had seen 10 years ago. But the climax of the trial came when the video from the USB drive was played for the entire court. The courtroom was utterly silent as they watched the moment Evans shoved Vivian. When the lights came up, no one spoke. The evidence was too clear. Finally, when Hannah took the stand, she didn't cry or tremble. She looked directly at the defendant. "I am an outsider in this. But I am carrying the child of a man who once loved Vivian Thorne. The victim. I couldn't stand by while a woman was murdered, a child lost his mother, and so many others chose silence for the sake of peace. If you have ever problems of there, for even 1 second in your life, thought about your oath as a doctor, then today, you will confess." Lawrence Evans looked up. His eyes were filled with desolation, defeat, and something that looked like regret. Finally, he broke down. "I was wrong." The confession rang out like a final bell, ending everything. The verdict was delivered. For the crime of murder, the maximum sentence, death. For the crime of embezzlement, 20 years in prison. The combined sentence was death. Stepping out of the courthouse, Dr. Thorne stood still for a long time. He never thought this day would finally come. Hannah held Leo's hand, the boy who had drawn it all, and whispered, "Your mom is smiling in heaven now. Isn't she?" The boy nodded. "Mommy said that everyone who does something wrong has to fix it eventually." The trial was over. A dark chapter that had spanned a decade was finally closed. But for those who remained, their story was just beginning. A month after the historic trial, Mercy General Hospital seemed to have taken on a new life. The hallways were repainted, the bylaws were changed, and a large marble plaque was placed at the entrance. "Medical ethics are truth, not compromise." Dr. Marcus Thorne, the man who had been wronged for 10 years, was officially reinstated as the chief of surgery, and received a commendation from the Department of Health for his persistence in defending the truth. The reinstatement ceremony was simple but emotional. When his name was called, the entire auditorium rose to its feet in a standing ovation. Many, for the first time, shed tears of admiration and regret for a man who had silently shouldered so much. Hannah sat in the front row, her pregnant belly now prominent. Leo sat beside her, holding her hand tightly. When Dr. Thorne stepped up to the podium, he didn't speak of his pain or his loss. He just looked toward Hannah and said, "I once thought I had lost everything, my wife, my faith, my very identity. But then I realized, honor isn't something that's given to you. It's something you hold on to. And without Hannah, without Leo, I would not have the chance to be standing here today. Honor isn't what's written in your file. It's what you keep in your heart, even when no one else believes in you." After the trial, with the agreement of all parties, Dr. Thorne decided to officially adopt Leo. The boy moved in with him to a small house on the edge of the city. He still loved to draw, but his pictures were no longer of people falling from balconies or of blurry shadows. Now, he drew the sky, his mother Vivian smiling brightly, and the baby in Hannah's belly. One day, he gave Hannah a new drawing. "I drew this for the baby." It was a picture of a family of 4, a father, a mother, a big brother, and a baby. At the bottom, he had written, "Our family is at peace now." "Right, Mom." Hannah laughed, but tears streamed down her face. That same week, Hannah officially received her offer of employment from the hospital as a full-time registered nurse in the surgical department. Most notably, a small room on the 5th floor, the very place where Vivian had fallen, was converted into a memorial room. It featured a smiling portrait of her and a single line engraved on a stone plaque: "Truth can be hidden, but a conscience never sleeps." In memory of Vivian Thorne, 1975 to 2015. A year later, on a beautiful day in May, the backyard of Mercy General Hospital was simply decorated with fresh flowers and twinkling lights. There was no lavish ceremony, no loud music, just sunshine, sincere smiles, and 2 brave people promising to spend their lives together. Hannah, in a simple white dress, stood hand in hand with Marcus Thorne. Leo, in a handsome little suit, solemnly brought them the wedding rings. As Hannah bent down to put the ring on, the little boy beamed. "Now I have a dad, a mom, and a baby sister. Mommy Vivian won't be sad anymore." 3 months after the wedding, on a sun-drenched afternoon, Hannah gave birth to a healthy, pink-cheeked baby girl. The birth certificate arrived at their home, naming the baby Vivian in memory, and Anne for a life of peace. That evening, Hannah opened her old journal. On the final page, she wrote, "No one ever knows what life has in store. One day you might be the subject of gossip, with your back against the wall. But if you hold on to who you are and refuse to break, then the next day, you will be the one to write the ending. My daughter, your mother is no hero. She is just someone who chose not to be silent. And you, my sweet girl, are the most wonderful reward for it all." She looked up and saw Leo rocking the baby, while Marcus stood behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder, his eyes filled with peace. Outside the window, the May sun shone down, filtering through the leaves of the trees, illuminating the room where, 10 years ago, a tragedy had begun. Today, that place has become the beginning of happiness. Thank you all for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below. Your support means the world to us.